We know flowers are present not only to add beauty to the plant, they are in fact reproductive part of the plant. And in this video, we are going to talk about sexual reproduction in plants. Structure of flower. The stalk of the flower is called pedicel. The swollen part is called thalamus. Calyx. It is the outermost whorl of the flower. It consists of 5 or more green leaf-like sepals which protects inner parts of flower in the bud stage. Corolla. It is the second whorl of the flower. It is formed of 5 or more brightly colored petals which attracts insects, birds or mammals for pollination of flower. Androecium is a male reproductive whorl. It consists of stamens. Each stamen is formed of a sac-like apical anther and a long slender filament. Pollen grains are formed inside the anther. They contain male gametes. Gynoecium. It is a female reproductive part. It is called pistil or carpel. It consists of stigma, style and ovary. The ovary contains ovules. The female gamete or egg is formed in the ovule. Now, calyx and corolla, that is the outer two layers, they are called accessory whorls of the flower because they just help in pollination but do not take part in reproduction. Third and fourth whorl, that is androecium and gynoecium, are essential parts or essential whorls of flower because they take part in seed formation. In the flower, stamen is the male reproductive part, while carpel or pistil is a female reproductive part. Some flowers contain both male and female reproductive parts. Such flowers are called bisexual flowers, for example, in pea and China rose. On the other hand, some flowers possess either the male or the female reproductive part. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers, for example, corn, cucumber, etc. The male flowers are called staminate flowers and female flowers are called pistillate flowers. Now, let us know about the different parts that make up stamen and pistil or carpel. A stamen is made up of two main parts, that is, anther and filament. The anther produces the pollen grains. It is the pollen grain that contains a male gamete. A pistil or carpel, on the other hand, is made up of three parts. The terminal or the upper part is called stigma. The middle, elongated part is style, and the swollen bottom part is the ovary. Inside the ovary, ovules are present. It is the ovule that has a female gamete called the egg cell. For sexual reproduction to take place, a male gamete is to be fused with a female gamete, thereby forming a zygote. Now, for that the male gametes have to reach the female gametes. For this, first the pollen grain carrying the male gametes is transferred from the stamen of a flower to the stigma of the same or the other flower. Such transfer of pollen grains is known as pollination. Therefore, the transfer of a male gametes from the stamen of a flower to the stigma of the same or the other flower is called pollination. If the pollen grain of the flower lands on the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant, it is called self-pollination. But if the pollen grain of a flower lands on the stigma of another flower of another plant of the same type, it is called cross-pollination. Pollination occurs with the help of different agents like wind, insect or animals and water. Once a pollen grain reaches the stigma of a suitable flower, a tube grows from the pollen grain. This tube travels through the style and reaches the ovary. The male gamete from the pollen travels in the pollen tube and reaches to the female gamete present in the ovule in the ovary. After that, male and female gamete fuse together to form a zygote. This process of fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. The zygote formed after the fertilization then divides several times to form an embryo inside the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and changes to a seed. The ovary, on the other hand, ripens and forms a fruit around the seed. At this time, the other part of the flower, like sepals and petals, fall off. So, a seed inside the fruit contains an embryo, which is actually a baby plant. Each time a seed is planted in the soil and provided appropriate conditions, it grows into a seedling, which then grows into a plant. Sexual reproduction in plants involve pollination, fertilization, formation of seeds and fruits, dispersal of seeds and fruits, and seed germination. Pollination. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. Pollen grains are immobile. They cannot reach the stigma by themselves. An external agent is required for this. It can be done by wind, water, animal, gravity, or growth contact. Pollination is of two types: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination takes place within the same flower or between two flowers on the same plant, whereas cross-pollination is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind. Difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, it is a transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower born on the same plant. It does not require any external agency. Both anthers and stigma mature at the same time. It can occur even when the flower is closed. It produces homozygous offsprings, that is, similar, identical offsprings are produced. They does not introduce any variations. New varieties of the plants are produced here. Whereas in the cross-pollination, it is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower born on a different plant of the same species. An external agent, that is wind, water, insects, etc. is always required. Anthers and stigma mature at different time because they are different plants and the growth is also different. It occurs only when the flower is open. Produces heterozygous offsprings. That means offsprings have mixed features of male and female parents, and introduces variation. Since two different male and female parents are involved, variations can be seen. Now, we have got few advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination as well as cross-pollination. For self-pollination, advantages are that flowers need not be scented or brightly colored because it is in the same plant. They need not produce a large number of pollen grains because the pollen from the same flower on the same plant can be easily transferred. There is no need of pollinating agent. It maintains the purity of the race, that is, no varieties can be seen there. And what are the disadvantages of self-pollination? New varieties are not produced. Now that is a big disadvantage. Disease resistance of plant decreases. Since the same variety is being grown year after year, they become disease resistant and there is a decrease in that. For cross-pollination, advantages are disease-resistant new varieties are formed. That is, the new varieties, they do not catch diseases easily. They ensure new varieties with new characters. They ensure new varieties because they are heterozygous. That is, they have two separate male and female parent. The male and female gametes come from two separate plants of the same species. Disadvantages of the cross-pollination. It depends on pollinating agents. It requires pollinating agent, that is by wind, water, insects or etc. The flowers, they need to be scented or brightly colored because if they are not brightly colored or scented, no agents will come nearby them. Or if they are not more in number, wind or water, other agents will not be able to act upon it. It is a wasteful process as pollen grains are to be produced in large numbers. So for the cross pollination, we require large number of pollen grains. Agents of pollination. Pollination can occur with the help of insects, wind, and water. Insect pollination. The pollen grains are transferred to a mature through the agency of insect like moths, butterflies, wasps, bees, beetles, etc. The characteristics are they are showy or brightly in color. The most infected pollinated flowers have a landing platform. The pollen grains are spiny, heavy, and surrounded by yellow, oily, sticky substance called pollen kit. It need to be sticky so that when the insects they sit on the flower, the pollens they stick on the feet or the legs of the insects. Some flowers provide safe place to insect or laying eggs. Wind pollination. It is a mode of cross pollination or transfer of pollen grains through the agency of wind. Flowers of wheat, rice, maize, and ryegrass are pollinated by wind. Other examples are coconut palm, date palm, maize, cannabis. Now, characteristics of wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers are small, white, or dull colored and do not produce nectar. That is why they do not attract insects. They produce small, dry, and light pollen grains in large number to be carried away by wind. They are small and dry so that wind can carry them easily. They have long anthers extending out of the flowers. Difference between insect pollinated and wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers. Flowers are inconspicuous and often white in color. That means they are dull. Flowers do not produce scent or nectar. Pollen grains are small, light, and dry. Stigma are large and feathery. Calyx and corolla are reduced to expose essential whorls like stem and gynoecium. That means in the wind pollinated flowers, they are extended outwards, they are protruded. Pollen grains are produced in very large quantity, whereas in insect pollinated flowers, flowers are large and brightly colored to attract insects. Flowers may have scent or nectar. Pollen grains are large, rough, and sticky. Stigmas are sticky and knob-like so that it sticks on the legs of insects. Calyx and corolla are well developed and large and they protect essential whorls. Pollen grains are produced in small quantity. Water pollination. It is a mode of pollination or transfer of pollen grains through the agency of water. It occurs in the aquatic plants such as Hydrilla, Vollissenaria. In Vollissenaria, the mature male flowers from the male plants detach and float passively. On coming in contact with female flower, their pollen grains are transferred to the stigma by the rupture of anthers. Characteristics of water pollinated flowers. Flowers are small and light for floating. Male and female flowers are present on separate plants. Male flower detaches itself from male plant and float on water surface. Pollen grains are produced in large in number. We read earlier that fusion of male gametes with the female gamete is called fertilization, and we get a zygote. Now, once we get a zygote, it has embryo inside the seed. Now, what are the changes in flower after fertilization? The fertilized ovum, that is zygote, grows into the embryo. The ovules changes into seed. The ovary changes into a fruit. Other parts like sepals and petals, they fall off. The fruit is the ripened ovary and seed bearing structure of a flowering plant. A fruit has fruit wall called pericarp. We can see the apple, the outer layer is called the pericarp. Fruits may be fleshy and juicy, dry, stony and hard. Mango, apple and orange are fleshy and juicy fruits, whereas gram, wheat, rice, maize are dry fruits. as their seed coat and pericarp are fused, and almonds and walnuts are stony and hard fruits.